Hello, I am Crystal Petry, and you are watching another episode of my podcast, 60 Minutes With. On today's episode, we are going to learn all about psychotherapy. If you are like me and you've never even heard that term, then this podcast is for you. So wherever you are, whatever you're doing, make sure you subscribe to my podcast right now. And here I have the privilege of introducing to you Ashley Anglin. She is going to educate all of us about what a psychotherapist is and if you may be in need of her services. So welcome to the podcast, Ashley. How are you?
Thank you, Crystal, for having me. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. So Ashley, where in the world are you?
Well, we are located in Houston, Texas, but we see clients all throughout the state. We do that virtually, but again, we're in Houston, Texas, where they can come in for face-to-face office visits if they so choose.
Well, my first question, obviously, at least for me, what is a psychotherapist?
So a psychotherapist is a mental health professional who uses various treatment modalities that have been researched, backed by research, in order to provide treatment for those who come in for a host of issues. Psychotherapy is a little bit longer treatment, and it does require additional skill set. We see individuals, we see couples, we see families, but generally speaking, that's what a psychotherapist does. And they can work in various realms of care, but we are in the outpatient setting.
Okay. And what is the educational pathway for someone who is considering that career choice?
Sure. So there, you definitely have to have a bachelor's degree, and there's master level psychotherapist. You can get it in Masters of Science, Masters of Education, Masters of Social Work, and then there's the PhD psychotherapist as well. And they can be in those same domains as well.
And what is the undergrad degree in that? Is it psychology?
Sure. So some people do psychology, some people do sociology, where they're, either studying the science of behavior or the study of a group of people. It's typically the study of something that, kind of helps them segue into this field of being a mental health professional.
What is the difference between psychotherapy, counseling, social work, psychiatry? And this is me thinking that there is a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a wonderful question. All of those different areas that you've described, they're all mental health providers, but they look at treatment in different realms. So for example, your psychiatrist, they're looking at it from a more medical approach, where they're looking at medications and making sure that the client is stable through medications. Psychologists, which are PhD level, they typically do testing. Now, many can do psychotherapy, but many do testing. In terms of counseling, again, they use various treatment modalities, and they're considered more short-term. In terms of a psychotherapist, more long-term. The acuity for the clientele may be a little bit greater. Social workers, not all social workers provide therapy. So, there's different areas of social work that someone can look into, but those who want to go into mental health, they have to become licensed and, meet a certain amount of hours, just like an LPC would, having to meet a certain hours. And I can speak more towards the LPC route because that is what I have. I'm actually an LPC supervisor, where I train counselors in training, where they have to meet with me for 3,000 hours, where I'm supervising their experience in order to be able to tell the state, yes, I think they'll be phenomenal, or no, they need a little bit more work in this area.
I feel like 3,000 hours, I feel like that is a lot. Now, I'm sure that every patient and the client appreciates that 3,000 hours, but is that a lot of hours? Because I feel like it is.
Well, I mean, and again, it's the requirements are based off of the state that that person would be seeking licensure under. So in terms of Texas, that is the expectation. And the expectation is over a course of time. You can't do it in less than 18 months,
Okay.
but you can't drag it out for a certain amount of time either. But I believe that it's a sufficient amount to be able to kind of learn and navigate and become comfortable in the role, because you're helping people to get better. So, you know, the training, the experience to be able to develop your expertise, I think that that's a wonderful thing.
How does psychotherapy actually help with mental health?
Well, mental health is something that we should all be practicing each day, every day, and making sure that we are in a good space. So in terms of psychotherapy, that would be treatment. So someone may come in and say, hey, you know, I am struggling with anxiety, and I've been noticing that it's been increasing over the last few months. I want to be able to come in, process, gain a skill set so I can be able to manage that. And that's where psychotherapy would come in and just, you know, do an assessment, seeing if there's anything underlying, and being able to help that client in that specific way.
How do psychotherapists, and if you want to speak from, you know, definitely your lived experience in the space, but how does psychotherapists handle the emotional trauma? Because when someone is in your office, Ashley, they are, I would just assume they're at their worst. Mm-hmm. They are upset, they're heartbroken, something is going on that is upsetting them, and in a very different way. So with that continuous, with the different clients that are always coming in with emotional baggage, for lack of a better word, how do you handle that?
Sure. You know, trauma is such individualized experience. What could be traumatic for one may not be considered, you know, traumatic for the other. Uh-huh. But even in that, it's important to be able just to sit in that with the client and be a presence in creating a safe space so they're able to share their story, but also understand that they can work through it in order to be able to get on another side of it. So, you know, as a mental health professional, what I try to do is definitely work on establishing that therapeutic rapport in the alliance, which is the relationship between the client and myself, and getting them comfortable to be able to share their story in a way that leads to empowerment.
Okay. Are you currently accepting new clients? And I know that you say that students come to you as well for the 3,000 hours. So this is a two-part question. Are you accepting clients, Ashley, and are you accepting students?
Sure. So yes, Bridging the Gap Psych Care, we are a practice. So we are accepting new clients. We also do supervision of those who are looking towards meeting their LPC associate hours. So we have 2 supervisors under the practice who are accepting people who are in need of a supervisor. And we also, we're a practicum site where students who are actually in practicum or internship in their graduate studies can come in and learn. So I think I answered your question in 3 parts.
And could you give us that email address, please?
Sure. So it's Ashley at BTG Site Care. It's ASHLEY, the at symbol, B as in boy, T as in Tom, GPSYCHCARE.com.
Excellent. And my listeners on Apple Podcasts would like to thank you for spelling that out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know it's pretty long.
No, that's fine. And I'll also put it in our description. So as people are watching and pulling it up, they'll be able to click on that email and be able to email you immediately. What do psychotherapists do to prevent burnout in this field?
Sure. So I am an advocate of we can't express the importance of self-care to clients and not engage in it in ourselves. So we talk about self-care, it should be something that's reviewed daily. Well, the same for a therapist, right? Making sure that we are creating those things that are important to prevent that. It could be in terms of improved eating, more physical activity, focusing on water intake, taking breaks, managing our schedules, in a way that can help us to be able to really work on that self-care. So there's quite a few things that can be put into our day-to-day to help us prevent that.
My next question is a two-part question, Ashley. So the first part of the question is, can you explain or give us the definition of depression and anxiety? And I'm asking because I feel like a lot of people just throw those words around nowadays. Mm-hmm. And for the people that do have depression and that do have anxiety, what are some tools that you can recommend for them to use to help with that?
Sure. So if anyone is experiencing any type of symptoms, and we'll use the example that you used in terms of depression and anxiety, I would say go in and seek professional services from a mental health provider so they can be able to help and assist with that. In terms of a definition of what depression and anxiety is, we look at the DSM, and that it houses all of those different types of, in lack of better word, disorders or issues, identified issues that clients come in with, and they have a definition for it. Now, in terms of symptoms, it can look like, well, you know what, in my prior example, I've been anxious and it's been impacting my day-to-day functioning. So because it's been impacting my day-to-day functioning, where I'm looking at it in terms of, hey, I'm not able to accomplish the things that I once did, or, I noticed that I'm shutting down, I'm more, tearful, I'm isolating. All of those things can definitely contribute to the need for a mental health professional. And again, typically when a client comes in or they're seeking some type of assistance, they're reporting, these are the symptoms that I've been experiencing.
Okay.
And then based off of that, we can look at the DSM and it tells us, okay, well, would this be defined as anxiety? Would this be defined as depression? And to your prior question, trauma, could this be related to traumas? Are we looking at some form of PTSD? So, it's very specific to and very individualized to that client. So I can't really say, this is exactly what it is and this is exactly what it will look like. But I will say if it's impacting in your day-to-day functioning and you're seeing that you're isolating or you're not feeling yourself, reach out so you can be able to get some services.
Is there any tools that you can give? And I know each diagnosis is specific to each individual, but are there any tools that you can give that someone in my audience, maybe they're suffering with depression or anxiety, that they can start implementing in their life?
Sure. So I'll use the example for anxiety. Typically, when we see someone who may be struggling with anxiety, the therapeutic approach that we would use would be some form of behavioral treatment, specifically cognitive behavioral therapy, where we are, looking at what the triggers are, what are the feelings associated, what are the thoughts, but ultimately, the behaviors. So in that, someone who would be struggling with anxiety, we would look at that component, but we would also be teaching mindfulness in terms of grounding techniques to be able to decrease or decrease the anxiety, so you can be able to be at a more functioning state while kind of processing those underlying things that can definitely be the cause of the culprit. And mindfulness looks like deep breathing. It looks like being able, there's this thing that we called where we engage the five senses. What are some things that I can see, touch, feel, smell, taste, where you're really trying to get your focus on the now and take care of the now versus worrying about the fear itself. So there's so many different techniques out there, but mindfulness typically helps ground the client in the moment.
How do you get clients, and I'm specifically talking about new clients, how do you get them to trust you?
Oh, well, the thing about it is that typically clients come in because they are ready to do the work, right? Mm-hmm. They've already researched you. They know your background, your level of expertise. They know what you look like. So they've already done the research prior to reaching out. So when they come in and they actually, ask the questions, when you share what treatment looks like with working with the therapist like me, that typically solidifies it. In my many years of experience, that's what it's been for me, where the client will come in, I'll share with them my expertise, what therapy is, what it's not, just reviewing their expectations as well, because that's very important. And they hit the ground running. And again, everybody's therapy walk looks different. It's not a sprint, but in terms of fostering that rapport, it happens early on, and I see it in the initial session in terms of just their comfort.
Okay. Mm-hmm. How do cultural differences impact therapy, particularly in the African American community?
Oh, yeah, that's an excellent question. Various cultures really have different ideologies as it relates to mental health. I think in terms of the African American culture, it's something that's learning. We're being more receptive to it. There's such a new wave in terms of how it's being put out in social media, and it's something that we're embracing. And even within the churches, we're seeing that the churches are on board. They're saying you can have Jesus and a therapist, kind of given that permission. But keeping in mind various cultures, it's important to be able to get versed with the culture so you can be able to understand, well, if I'm sensing some resistance, it's not a me thing. It's just more in terms of maybe them tackling, a view that they had about therapy or what they were told about a therapist, So again, a lot of it is coming to the therapeutic realm with understanding, with patience, with grace, and just being able to understand that for many cultures, mental health is something that is now being embraced when maybe it wasn't in the past.
I remember, Ashley, like maybe 10 years ago, if that long, like therapy was a curse word. Therapy was for crazy people. And I say that in quotes. Therapy was for weak people. I say that in quotes as well. But now, like, it has completely shifted the conversation around it. Just like you said, the conversation around it, the feelings around it has completely shifted. And I feel like in 2024, going into 2025, it's almost like, if you're not going to therapy, what's wrong with you? Like you need to be going to therapy. It's kind of the conversation now. But what do you think led to that shift?
I think just in terms of how it's just, I think it's just in terms of exposure to it, different areas and domains, fostering it. Now, when you go to even get a checkup from your mental health, not mental health, your physical health provider,
Yes.
they're asking, questions regarding your mental health and how you're doing. And if a referral is needed, they make it. So you're seeing it at church, you're seeing it when you see your doctor, you're even seeing it at the drugstore, at schools, different areas, sports teams.
Yes.
So I think that has definitely led to the shift, and people seeing, well, if my closest friends or relatives are doing it, if my work is providing, free sessions, for me to be able to sit and speak with someone, this must mean something.
Right.
And when I say free sessions, I mean through EAP.
Right. Yeah, I agree, but you are right. It's, everywhere you're going, people are acknowledging and recognizing that mental health is important, and taking care of yourself is just as important as the physical part of taking care of yourself as well.
Absolutely. And I'm thankful for this new wave.
Yeah. Yes. What role does self-disclosure play in the therapist-client relationship?
So self-disclosure in terms of the client, or self-disclosure as it relates to the therapist?
Oh, that's good. Let's go with both of those.
Okay. Well, for the client, that's important, because I often share in our initial sessions, please give yourself grace, but at the same time, understand what you put in is what you put out. So if you're willing to self-disclose, that's great. And if you're hesitant, we look at, well, yes, we're new to each other, but if there's reluctance, let's talk about that. What does that look like for you? In terms of the therapist, self-disclosure, we're careful with that, because again, sessions are for and about the client, and that's what it needs to be. But if there's something that comes up throughout therapy, and it's like, I understand that. I went through something similar. So it makes the therapist, feel or be viewed in a more humanistic way, versus there being some type of hierarchy where the therapist is here and the client is there. So it helps with that, in that form. So that's why I ask, in self-disclosure, which.
What does, and explain to me, what is peer support, and how does peer support help with clients who are dealing with mental health?
Sure. So we see peer support specifically in areas of substance abuse. So peer support may look like a peer leading a support group. They're not providing therapy. They're not giving any recommendations or anything like that. It's just more in terms of support and accountability. And again, we see that more in the realm of substance abuse, specifically.
Okay. I keep getting my first letter wrong. How can therapists address mental health in marginalized communities?
By addressing the taboo. I know that that is a huge thing for me, to bring awareness to various communities, specifically the African American community, about what mental health is, what it's not, and the importance of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think by addressing it, by putting it out there, really helps to kind of take away that negative stigma, and really encourage those who require it to get it.
Right. What are some common misconceptions when it comes to therapy? I know that, as we were talking earlier, Ashley, that, the shift has happened, the thinking about it has changed, but there are still some misconceptions out there. What are some of those?
Well, I've heard so many things over the course of 16 years. Therapists read your mind, or, therapists, they try to replace your religious faith, or, more things, but pretty much under those umbrellas there. And it couldn't be further from the truth. When we see clients and we're doing our assessments, we want to know those things that are important to you so we can incorporate that. So if you say that your faith is important and we're talking about self-care, that's definitely going to be something incorporated into your self-care. We're not trying to replace it. We're just kind of looking at what is triggering the symptoms. We want to get to the root. And oftentimes, there are so many layers that need to be pulled back. And once we can get to the root, then we can begin doing, the great work there, and just kind of teaching skills and providing clients with those tools in order to live an improved life.
How does family help or hurt therapy?
Well, if a lot of those identified issues are related to family, then, family could be an issue. But, if it is not, and family is viewed as a support, we would talk about how can your supports hold you accountable in your quest for mental health, improved mental health. So it just depends on the role of the family within the client's life. So that's truly important.
Ashley, as an African-American woman, why did you decide to choose this career path as being a psychotherapist? Because there are not a lot of African-American male or females in this career space.
Absolutely. I have always been mesmerized with the study of human behavior, why people do what they do. And it's something I've always enjoyed. I come from a family where they are mental health professionals as well, following in the footsteps of my mom. She is a psychotherapist, retired professor. My uncle and my aunt, they own a residential treatment center for adolescents. So I come from a family of mental health professionals, but we're in different areas of mental health.
How does you being an African-American female in this space impact, and I want to say positively, just because I'm an African-American myself and I'm going to assume the best, positively affect your clients, whether they are African-American, white, Hispanic, Asian, or whatever?
Sure. So, as I mentioned earlier, people know what I look like prior to even coming to that initial session. So I've never had someone be surprised in terms of what they see when we get face to face or on a call virtually. But I think for African-American clients, it creates a space of comfort. It feels like, there is this piece where if I share maybe what it looked like to be discriminated against, that she would understand and get it, not just as a therapist, but on her lived experiences. But the same with a woman, and it could be a woman from a different race or culture. Hey, I'm choosing, a woman because she understands what it would feel like to be, experience this. So it's truly based on client preference. But I do notice in my practice that the amount of African American clients I have, they've expressed, a level of comfort based off of us sharing the same culture.
How does systematic racism, kind of staying in that same vein, how does systematic racism impact mental health for those in the Black community?
Oh, that is a big question. And I'll try to answer it in the way of, when we talk about something that is in place to prevent someone from achieving it, someone may struggle with issues of feeling insubordinate or feeling defeated or feeling like they have this new hurdle that they are many hurdles put in place in order for them to achieve. So it can feel very defeating, but at the same time, very empowering because, okay, while I see this, it doesn't mean that it's a no. Maybe I have to approach it in a different way in order to be able to achieve whatever that success is, that is needed. But systemic racism, I mean, that's such a big question. And there's so many answers to that, but I'll answer it in that way for the sake of time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
What is the difference between mental health and mental illness, or is there a difference?
Sure. So mental health is something that we should all be practicing each day. Our mental health, just like we take care of our physical health each day, or supposed to be, or should be rather.
Yes.
So when we talk about mental illness, that is something that, we addressed with a mental health professional. So for example, in my quest to work on my mental health, if I know that I'm struggling with anxiety, and I know that sometimes it comes in waves, I'm going to outreach a mental health provider so I can address the anxiety, this diagnosis of anxiety or depression or PTSD or schizophrenia, whatever it is. So, it's important to know and be able to differentiate the two. Mental health is something what we should be approaching, and mental illness is what we are going to a mental health professional to take care of and address.
Okay. How can someone, and we've been, talking a lot about just examples of depression and anxiety, but on the flip side of that coin, how can someone know if their well-being is on track, if their mental health is on track and on an upwards track, that they're doing well?
Sure. So typically what happens is when a client comes in for treatment, we'll look at what their norm is, what do dips look like, what do improvements look like? And we're looking at it, the trajectory of it all, and as they're learning new skills, as they're processing, does it feel like it's on and up and up? How long and consistent has this been? And based off of that, that's the way we determine, we're assessing throughout their time if they are on an improved trajectory, and sometimes it takes others longer than some, and that's okay, and then there may be a component where medications need to be incorporated, and that's outside of my realm, but a referral would be made in terms of, okay, let's look at a psychiatrist, or your PCP. So you can look at that from the medical component. But again, we gauge it just throughout the course of treatment.
As a psychotherapist, Ashley, can you prescribe medication?
I cannot. That is outside of my realm. You would
Okay.
need to go to, someone who has been trained under the medical model. So that would be a primary care physician, a psychiatrist, and even some physician assistants
Mhm.
that work alongside those doctors where they can be able to prescribe.
I know this next question is very personalized for each client,
Mhm.
but how do you know, and explain it to the best of your ability, how do you know when it's time to wrap up the therapy, that the client has met the goal, they're doing better, they're doing well? How do you know when to say goodbye?
Sure. So what you're referring to is termination, and termination should be addressed at the first session, the initial session,
Okay.
because the idea is for the client to be able to gain what they need and then for them to be able to completely terminate once they've achieved their goals. So termination is looked at the very first session, but after an assessment is completed, a treatment plan is created. Treatment plan is a fancy word meaning blueprint. It lets you know what the client is there to work on. We've been using anxiety for an example. So, hey, based off the assessment, this client is here to address anxiety. We will develop goals, treatment goals together, long-term and short-term. And once those goals are achieved, that's when you know that termination needs to take place. But again, you're addressing it early on so the client isn't blindsided, but they're knowing, okay, you know what? I've achieved this goal. I've been achieving that goal. And because I've been achieving these goals, my frequency in terms of how often I see my therapist has decreased. So I know that eventually, termination is coming. And then when the therapist tells me, you know what, hey, I've met my treatment goals, I'm not blindsided, and I knew that it was coming. They're aware of it.
And maybe you've experienced this in your practice, how do you keep the client from thinking that they have become friends with you?
Oh, so that's addressed at the initial session too. So
Okay.
earlier I referenced the therapeutic alliance. That is the relationship between the client and the therapist. We talk about what that is. We talk about the boundaries that are in place. We're not family. We're not friends. You're the client. I'm the therapist. And there's boundaries there. So what do those boundaries look like? So those are expressed early on and they're reinforced throughout the process.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Mhm.
What are some warning signs that someone, and again, I know it's specific to each individual,
Mhm.
but what are some warning signs that someone may be on the verge of a health crisis or a mental breakdown?
Well, you would see, and again, we're generally speaking,
Correct.
where a client may begin to decline, where maybe they're isolating more, or they're not engaging in the things that once brought them joy. They're not going to work, or they're not going to school, that type of thing. So that would be an indication, okay, well, something is going on here, and based off of that we need to kind of look at that and make a determination.
Does stress, and I'm asking because I feel like stress is just an everyday part of life.
Yes.
Some days you have a little stress, some days you have a lot of stress, but it's always there. How does stress impact mental health?
So stress, we know that there's two forms of stress. There's eustress and there's distress. Eustress is that stress that we may feel, but we're able to work through it and it yields positive results.
Okay.
Distress are those things that get in the way and they just feel like a ton of bricks, something that you can't move. And that's typically what impacts someone negatively. And over a course of time, if that stress isn't managed or dealt with, then we begin to see how there may be some physical symptoms, that pop up. I've heard people say, you know what, I've been stressed out so long, now I'm having blood pressure problems, or,
Wow.
those type of things.
Yes.
So I just say that as to say, distress can impact you if it's not managed.
Mm. And what about sleep or a lack of sleep? How does that impact your mental health?
Sure. I mean, as humans, we are required to get our sleep, and I'm guilty of it. Sometimes as well, not getting the amount that's needed and required. And your body knows, what it feels like when you're not rested. You kind of feel kind of sluggish.
Mhm.
You're kind of dragging throughout the day. So it's important to be able to have a really good sleep pattern. I know with clients who struggle with that, we often look at, well, what does your sleep routine look like? Are you on social media or, gadgets, or looking at TV up until you fall asleep? Or, are you ending it at a certain time and then allowing yourself to get in a space of being restful? Are you engaging in some form of grounding or mindfulness to help facilitate that amount of sleep and, quality of sleep? So that's what we look at.
Do you think that social media, the 24-hour news channels, has negatively impacted mental health and mental illness?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Always being connected, always having it so readily available, and it not be censored. It's constantly putting one, at a heightened state, on guard, type of thing. So I think that it's important to be able to be cognizant and aware of your relationship with social media, your relationship with devices, TVs, that type of thing. And also for anyone who may have children, that they are able to put things in place to help them learn a healthy relationship with devices as well.
Right. And I know that a lot of devices, at least nowadays, like it falls under the parental controls where you can set like an amount of time that your child can play on this device, or whatever, you can set it for an hour or 2 hours. And then after that, it'll turn off, or, something like that. So I always thought that was such a great idea, that you can go in and limit, because sometimes, the parent could be off or cleaning or, something, and maybe don't realize how long the child has been on those devices.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so true. That's so true. But kids are so savvy too, they can work around that. So it's just interesting. But again, I think overall, not
Mhm.
just children, not just adults, that we can work on a healthier relationship with our devices, but understand to those who have children in their lives, that kids are looking at your relationship with devices, and they're
Absolutely.
mirroring and mimicking what it is that they see you do.
Absolutely. Yeah, I never thought about that, but you are absolutely correct on that, because if the parent is always on Instagram or TikTok, the child is going to be right there behind them,
Yeah.
right there behind them. What are some daily habits that you can tell us about that would help promote health and emotional well-being?
Sure. So I would say, starting with sufficient sleep, healthy sleep, making sure that you have a good sleep routine in place, things that help facilitate that. In addition to, when you wake up, what is the first thing that you do? Are you engaging in some form of mindfulness? For those who, are big into their faith? You know, are you spending time in reflection? And then, you know, what are the next things? What are you doing? Are you engaging in some form of physical activity or not? Or, you know, what have you? What does nutrition look like? You know, when are you incorporating, you know, checking emails? Is that the first thing that you do in the morning? If so, could you push it back some? You know, what just establishing a good morning routine, I believe, sets the tone, but also creating breaks throughout the day for you to just be is important. I believe that when we become intentional in just those few things, that it will move mountains in terms of how we go about fostering and promoting a healthier relationship with our mental health.
Ashley, you have spoken that you've been in this space and you've been in this career for about 16 years. What would you say is your personal intention as a psychotherapist?
Sure. So as mentioned, I've been in the mental health field, and I said 16 years. It's actually been longer than that. It's been 18 years.
Wow.
And I've worked at various levels of care, from inpatient, residential, PHP, which is partial hospitalization, IOP, and outpatient. This is outpatient. And, you know, at those various levels of care, you see clients who are experiencing various forms of acuity.
Okay.
And the biggest thing that I've taken away from like my experience, no matter the level of care, is truly making sure that people understand that they can advocate for themselves as it relates to their mental health, that they have a voice, and understanding too, for those marginalized communities, that mental health is a good thing. It's not, you know, a bad thing. You know, so those are the biggest thing for me, just in my work in the mental health field.
And my final question for you, Miss Ashley, and you have been amazing on this podcast, because like I said at the beginning, I had never heard of psychotherapy. So I'm so glad that you came on and you were really able to explain it and educate it in a way that I could understand exactly what it is that you do, but also who could be in need of your services.
Sure. So, and thank you for all of that, and thank you for having me on. But anyone who finds that, you know, hey, I'm struggling, you know, or I'm noticing that I'm experiencing these symptoms and they're not going away, you know, come in. Again, we see individuals, we see couples, we see families. So there's anyone who would find themselves kind of experiencing something like that, or if, you know, they have been seen by a provider and someone's recommending that they have services, or their employers or what have you, come on in. We are accepting new clients, and we would be more than happy to work with someone who's seeking services.
Absolutely. So for my final question, Ms. Ashley, who do you think would make a great guest on the podcast? But you have to help me get them on.
Sure. So I know this person very well. His name is Jesse Anglin. He is a veteran financial advisor, and he is a financial guru where he's done countless speaking engagements for those who are inquiring about financial advising, what to do, where to go, and estate planning, all of that. He is your person. So I think that he would be a lovely addition to your podcast.
Thank you. And you know, I have never had a financial advisor on here. He's going to be the first.
Awesome.
Yes. Awesome. So thank you so much. I'm excited to learn from him. I'm excited. Again, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time.
Yes. And for all of my listeners, my audience, thank you so much for tuning in, watching, and learning. Remember, you can get Ashley's podcast and all of my other podcasts on YouTube Podcasts and Apple Podcasts. And remember, you always have time to listen and learn on the go.